God, y'all.
In the last video uploaded to the channel, we took a look at the pilot episode of SmackDown and we compared the debut show with the WCW Thunder episode that aired on the same night. I thought it was quite fun going back and forth between both presentations, kinda emulating what it would have been like to channel hop between both shows as if we were back in 1999. So I thought, why not try the same thing for WWF Raw and WCW Nitro? And there's no better place than to begin than 1995. The second episode of Nitro was the first show that actually went up against Raw. The first episode of Nitro went unopposed, there was no Raw that week, and I've already talked about the first episode of Nitro, so we will give week 2 a shot and see what happens. Raw vs Nitro first happened then on the 11th of September 1995. Just a few things about this though that I feel I need to bring up because I'm sure people will comment about it. WCW Nitro and WWF Raw may have aired at different times depending on a viewer's location, time zone and cable provider. It's only a YouTube video here, we aren't going to split hairs, so what we're just going to do is pretend that both shows ran side by side at the exact same time. We won't take into consideration commercial breaks either. The WWE Network runtime for both of these shows is 45 minutes, so we will play both at the same time and both shows will end at the same time. So for example also, if Raw has 2 matches within 15 minutes but Nitro only has 1, then we will compare the whole 15 minutes head to head. We will, however, treat main events separately. They will be judged on their own. I'll also say what I would have watched when I was younger for each match and segment, and I'll also say if I was right or wrong in doing so. I'll definitely admit when I was watching the wrong show. Finally, if people enjoy this video, I'll be happy to make it a weekly series going forward, so do let me know in the comments if you enjoy this. Anyway, let's get started. The first time Nitro and Raw went head to head was on September 11th, 1995. To give you the lay of the land here, let's first look at the champions during this time period and the upcoming pay-per-views that each company were promoting. On the WWF side, Big Daddy Cool Diesel was your WWF champion, the Heartbreak Kid Shawn Michaels was the Intercontinental champion, Bertha Faye was the Women's champion, and Owen Hart and Yokozuna were your tag team champions. The WWF were promoting In Your House 3 at the time, and the main event there would feature the IC champion and the WWF champion teaming up to take on the tag champions in a triple header tag match. In Your House 3 would take place on September 24th, so it was 2 weeks away. On the WCW side, Hulk Hogan was your world champion, Sting was the United States champion, the Renegade was the television champion, and Dick Slater and Bunkhouse Buck were the tag champions. WCW were promoting Fall Brawl War Games at the time. It was taking place the same week as this Nitro we're going to look at. The 17th of September is when Fall Brawl would go down. So this Nitro was a go-home show where they would try to sell the pay-per-view as much as possible. The main event of Fall Brawl would feature a War Games match pitting the Dungeon of Doom against Sting, Randy Savage and Hulk Hogan. Hogan's team needed a 4th member thanks to Vader leaving WCW just a few days before the second episode of Nitro. Right, let's get started then. Raw starts off by showing us highlights from SummerSlam 1995's ladder match between Shawn Michaels and Razor Ramon, while Nitro airs its classic intro. Nitro is live from Florida, by the way. Raw was taped in Ohio around 2 weeks earlier. Keep that in mind, it will come into play later. Raw hypes 2 upcoming matches here to start things off. Sid vs Shawn Michaels for the IC title, and Razor Ramon vs Davey Boy Smith. And then the WWF air a brand new Raw intro video as Vince McMahon announces that this Raw is the season premiere of the new fall season. Obviously a marketing tactic here and nothing more. The intro video is quite interesting though. This episode of Raw here is the only time the intro music uses vocals. The classic I Like It Raw song is played here with singing, but the next week the music used was an instrumental. The intro shows WWF stars wrestling on top of Titan Towers. Fans are rushing around to get a view of the action. It's actually a good intro, I used to like this. Over on Nitro, the announce team of Eric Bischoff, Bobby Heenan and Steve McMichael welcome us to the show, while Eric tells us that Nitro's main event will be the match of the century, Hulk Hogan defending the WCW Championship against Lex Luger. Bischoff also tells us that Scott Norton will be in action, and we will also see the debut of Sabu on this very show. So within the first few minutes of each broadcast, viewers can decide what they would rather see. Do they want to see Sid versus Shawn and Razor versus Davey Boy? Or do they want to see Lex Luger versus Hulk Hogan, a Sabu match and a Scott Norton match? Tough call here, but for me, when I was younger, I probably would have stuck with the WWF here based on these announcements. I was a big fan of Razor, Davey and Shawn, so Raw would have maybe appealed to me a little bit more from a match standpoint. But at the same time, this Nitro show looks all new and shiny. I would maybe have been also attracted to this fresh wrestling show out of pure curiosity, but anyway, let's move on. After both commentary teams hyped their respective shows, Vince McMahon and Jerry Lawler in front of a painfully obvious green screen here, it's time for the first matches. On the Raw side we have the Razor Ramon vs British Bulldog match kicking things off, and on Nitro we have Sabu vs Das Wunderkind Alex Wright. Two very different styles of wrestling match here. Sabu vs Alex Wright was all about high risk offense, while Razor and Davey was more of a traditional, grounded WWF match. As a kid in 1995, I'll just be honest, I probably would have stuck with Davey vs Razor, but watching both of these shows back now, Sabu and Alex Wright were showing us stuff we weren't accustomed to seeing on Monday Night Wrestling shows. Davey vs Razor was definitely a much more sound wrestling match, but Sabu was such an unpredictable wrestler that it's hard to take your eyes away from what he was doing in the ring. Sabu got the pinfall win, but the decision was reversed when a table was introduced after the match, and Sabu jumped off the top rope to the outside, putting Alex through the table and costing himself the victory that he just earned. So quite a bit going on here. On Raw, Razor and Davey Boy went back and forth in a rather safe match, but what really hurt it for me was the fact that Raw went to a commercial break right in the middle of the match. I know Raw wasn't live, so in theory the WWF could make minimal cuts to the match through the magic of editing, but it always takes me out of the match whenever this happens. Towards the end of the match, Dean Douglas hit the ring and attacked Razor while the referee was out. This led to the 1-2-3 Kid coming to the ring. Kid was trying to even the odds here, but the referee saw Kid's interference and therefore Davey Boy won via DQ. A lot going on to end this one too. The match was solid enough, so it's hard to pick a winner here. I'm going to go with a tie and give a point each to Raw and Nitro. Nitro was good for the unpredictability of Sabu. Raw maybe played it safe, but the Razor vs Davey Boy match was actually solid despite the commercial break in the middle of the match. Back on Nitro, we are told that VK Wall Street will meet Sting in a United States title match, and afterwards, Mean Gene Okerlund introduces us to Nature Boy Ric Flair. Flair is going to have an in-ring promo here, and he was on fire. Ric Flair was going up against his old friend Arn Anderson at Fall Brawl later in the week, and the Nature Boy talked here about how the two used to be friends, but now Arn Anderson has turned into a rather boring family man. Lex Luger, who is going to main event this episode of Nitro, then comes to the ring. Remember, Lex Luger just came back to WCW the week prior, and why the total package came down here though is anyone's guess. He just tells Rick that some things never change and the Nature Boy is just too much, and then he hops out of the ring and the segment is over. Bischoff then hypes the Fall Brawl pay-per-view, so let's switch over and see what Raw was doing at this same time. Razor Ramon and the 1-2-3 Kid are still in the ring. Vince McMahon wants to have a word with the bad guy and the Kid, and Vince asks what was the Kid thinking costing Razor the match here. Kid argues that Razor cost him a match the week prior. Kid says he's tired of being treated like a child by the bad guy, and then the 1-2-3 Kid challenges Razor to a match the next week on Raw. Kid says that Razor is a good friend, but the bad guy will lose in their match next week. Razor accepts the match, and honestly, the Nitro Ric Flair promo was better because Jerry Lawler would not stop talking over this entire promo on Raw. Remember too that this was taped. This wasn't Jerry Lawler going off on one live here. This show was edited to include Jerry Lawler talking and talking over an in-ring promo. So I give this one to Nitro here. While the Razor promo did set up a match for the following week, Jerry Lawler completely ruined it by not keeping his mouth shut on commentary. VK Wall Street vs Sting is next, and during Sting's entrance, Eric Bischoff gave away what would happen during Raw's Shawn Michaels vs Sid match. Eric Bischoff flat out told everyone that Shawn Michaels wins the match with the super kick. The tactic here was to stop people channel surfing and keep viewers with Nitro. It was an underhanded move for sure, but it's also one of those things that make this era in wrestling so much fun to watch. It was ruthless. Anyway, the audience loves Sting here. It's always a pleasure seeing him in action, and he went pretty hard here to start off, and Mike Rotunda could still go at this point. People seem to think that his WCW run here was close to the end for Mike, but no, Mike would have a pretty busy run in Japan towards the end of his WCW tenure. The match was short here. The Stinger gets the win with a top rope crossbody, no complaints. Over on Raw, we had a tag team match, the Smoking Guns taking on the Brooklyn Brawler and Rad Radford. This one was even shorter than the Sting match, around 2.5 minutes long, an easy win for the Smoking Guns and a big loss for all the rest of us. This wasn't great, an easy win for Nitro here. Years ago, I would have chosen the Sting match over this Raw match, and today I firmly believe it's still the right choice. After the Smoking Guns match, we see a promo with Dustin Rhodes, who will be making his WWF debut shortly as Goldust. Goldust talks about The Undertaker here, saying that gold sheds no darkness, and the dark evil cloud that covers the World Wrestling Federation will soon be sent to the heavens, courtesy of Goldust. A good promo here. It may have left us with more questions than answers, but that's what Goldust was all about during this time. So we're now ready for our next matches on both shows. On Nitro, Macho Man Randy Savage is in action taking on Scott Norton, and on Raw, Isaac Yankem DDS is going up against Scott Taylor. I would have chosen the Nitro match here, and I would have been right in doing so. The WWF Raw match was a minute-long squash match. It wasn't competitive, and I couldn't have cared less about the Isaac Yankem character, so there was nothing there that I would have wanted to see. Nitro, on the other hand, has Macho Man Randy Savage. Granted, I didn't know much about Scott Norton at this time, and I only came to appreciate Norton in later years, but I still would have watched Nitro here had these two matches been on TV at the exact same time. The Savage match was also way more competitive. It went on for nearly 6 minutes. It seemed like Randy Savage was in trouble for a good portion of the match, and yeah, nothing more to say. WCW was miles better here. Isaac Yankem wins on Raw. Randy Savage wins on Nitro after the Dungeon of Doom's plan to attack the Macho Man backfired. Quick side note, before the Savage match on Nitro, Eric Bischoff talked about the upcoming matches on WCW Saturday night. Disco Inferno was about to make his WCW debut, the Renegade was going to be in action, and Flying Brian Pillman was going to take on Alex Wright. The in-ring action stops on Raw as we go over to Todd Pettingill for the In Your House report. For those who don't know, the WWF used to put these reports on Raw simply to hype the upcoming pay-per-view. Sometimes they would also include additional studio promos and recaps from other weekly shows. Some people can't stand Todd Pettingill, but I don't mind him at all. He's very corny and he's very cheesy, but he embodies this 90s era of the WWF so well. His jokes used to fall so flat, and they still do to this very day, but I don't mind him at all. People have this real hate for Todd Pettingill, and I'll never understand it. Imagine getting annoyed with a mid-90s wrestling host. Anyway, after the In Your House report, we see Barry Dudinsky trying to sell us some Shawn Michaels merchandise. Call 1-800-TITAN-91 to get your Shawn Michaels hat and Shawn Michaels glasses. Now it's time for the main events. Nitro has Lex Luger challenging Hulk Hogan for the WCW Championship, and Raw has Sid challenging Shawn Michaels for the IC Championship. Remember, Eric Bischoff already gave away the Raw result, so if you were watching Nitro and you heard that announcement, it was really up to you if you wanted to switch over to see HBK successfully defend the gold. Shawn was able to work just fine with bigger guys. It was kinda his calling card around this era, and this match here doesn't disappoint. If I'm honest though, as a kid, I probably would have chosen the Luger vs Hogan match over this, simply because it was a world title match. It was Luger's first match back during this WCW return also, so even though it's a Hogan match, there was still this sense of unpredictability going on. Looking back now, the better match was definitely the Shawn Michaels vs Sid match, but don't get me wrong also, Shawn vs Sid wasn't spectacular, it was just better than Hogan vs Luger. Shawn and Sid were capable of better matches, and we would see better matches between the two in late 96 and early 1997. This match here could have been better for sure, but it was still a decent main event. Just like Eric Bischoff said, Shawn Michaels won after hitting Sweet Chin Music. What the WWF done here though, probably unintentionally, was show that Shawn Michaels, from an in-ring perspective, was much more capable of having good matches in comparison to both Hulk Hogan and Lex Luger in 1995. Shawn's athleticism mixed with his timing and selling made his match really stand out in comparison to Luger vs Hogan. And give Sid some credit too, he done his job of being an imposing giant quite well here. Hogan vs Luger was filled with lockups, wasting time, posing, headlocks. Eric Bischoff threw some shade at the WWF champion Diesel during the match too, saying that the World Wrestling Federation champion couldn't even make it past the mid-levels of WCW. Luger put the torture rack on Hogan after some pushing and shoving. Hogan no-sold it, he hulked up, leg drop, pin, and the Dungeon of Doom hit the ring. It's a DQ finish here. Sting and Randy Savage run down to make the save. So yeah, going in blind, I would have chosen Luger vs Hogan as a kid, but that would have been the wrong choice. Michaels vs Sid was the better match. We've got a few minutes left on both shows. Over on Raw, we get an advertisement for the upcoming In Your House show featuring WWF superstars invading some kid's home to watch the pay-per-view. Doc Hendricks then interviews Shawn Michaels and Diesel. HBK does most of the talking here as the triple header tag match is put at the forefront. We then get a preview for next week's matches and the show goes off the air. Back on Nitro, Mean Gene is in the ring interviewing Sting, Lex Luger, Savage and Hogan. Because Vader had left WCW and gone AWOL, as they put it, Hogan needed a fourth wrestler to join his War Games team. Sting suggested Lex Luger. Savage did not want Luger on the team, but the deciding vote came down to Hulk Hogan, and Lex Luger was added to the babyface War Games squad, making Nitro's main event here even more pointless. WCW always went on a few minutes extra after Raw, by design of course, so the remaining TV time was used to promote Fall Brawl and next week's Nitro, and both shows are now over and in the bag. So let me go back now and see what I thought was the better matches and segments. In the opening matches, Razor vs Davey and Sabu vs Alex Wright, I thought both of these had their good points and I couldn't pick a winner, so that's 1 point each. After that, I thought Ric Flair's in-ring interview with Gene Okerlund was better than Razor and Kid's interview, so that's a point to Nitro. Nitro gets 2 further points for the Sting and Randy Savage matches being better than the Smoking Guns and Isaac Yankem matches. And finally, Raw gets a point for the HBK match being better than the Hogan match. A total of 2 points for Raw and 4 points for Nitro. So in closing, overall I thought Nitro was the better show. Raw had a better, more fulfilling main event, but as a complete package, I do think Nitro was the better wrestling show here. Raw's mid-card didn't do the show any favours. It's actually hard to get the final rating here. Reports vary online, but it was more or less a tie, around a 2.5 rating for both shows. And yes, I know you'll say that you have a link showing who won, but I can also provide you with 3 links saying the other show won. So this tells me it was too close to call. I'm calling it a draw. I hope you guys liked this video. I'll be honest, I had a lot of fun putting this one together, and it's good looking back at these shows with maybe an older and more experienced point of view. If you'd like to see more of these, do let me know. I wouldn't want to keep making these if it isn't something people want to see. But thanks for watching, and maybe next time we can take a look at the second time Raw and Nitro went head to head.